Cyclists are assholes. They'll see a bike lane and ride in the road because they can. That's an actual comment we got on this channel, and it's one of the most puzzling arguments we've ever seen against urban cycling and bike infrastructure. It's just so counterintuitive, like hearing someone claim that drivers are parking their cars in farmers' fields instead of perfectly good parking lots. If it's happening, it's a little odd, something we should investigate instead of saying, well, I guess there's no point in bike lanes. So one day I saw it happening and decided to figure out what was going on. Why are these people ignoring a perfectly nice bike lane? Oh, okay, there's a reason. The route is blocked for construction. Another one. Why is this person ignoring the bike lane? Don't you know that makes us look bad? Oh, okay, same thing. Blocked for construction. What about this one? Same thing? Yep, blocked for construction. So construction is one common reason for cyclists to be out of the bike lane, but there's an important detail. If you're driving or walking, you might not even realize that there's a construction detour on the bike route. For some of these, I didn't realize until I went down the route myself. I can imagine someone seeing this scene and thinking, damn cyclists, get on the bike path. Here's another reason to find cyclists outside of a bike path: snow. Our city, Montreal, does a pretty good job of clearing bike paths, but some boroughs are better than others, and on the day of a big storm, no snow clearing is perfect, and you often see people cycling on the road. Many other cities don't even try to clear their bike paths, so cyclists there have no choice but to ride in the road for a few weeks or months each winter, or simply not ride at all. One day I also noticed many cyclists riding on the road here, when there's a nice two-way bike path on the other side. I crossed the road and watched for a few minutes and realized what was going on. People were coming off a side street and finding there to be too much car traffic to easily cross over to get into the bike path, so they used the car lane for a block or two before using a signalized intersection to cross. Basically, instead of doing this, they did this. Things like this seem to happen more often on two-way bike paths that are on one side of the street, like this person who's outside of the bike lane in order to get to a destination on the other side. Here's another place where I saw people riding outside of the bike lane. What's going on? It's a great two-way bike path, but it's also new and only about 250 meters long. Sometimes when there are new bike lanes, people just don't realize that they're there at the beginning, or that they're open after construction, especially if, like here, they're riding on the road and then a bike lane appears. I saw a similar thing with this new bike lane in Toronto. This person reaches the start of a new bike lane but doesn't immediately switch over. There's a good chance that they just didn't realize it was there, or they're working on switching to the side with the bike lane after realizing. Back to the Montreal example, another issue here is that it lasts about 250 meters, and then at the bridge it turns into a sidewalk. Cyclists are allowed to use the sidewalk, but it's narrow at places and has pedestrians, and also turns away from the road to go in a different direction. A cyclist might decide to take the road going over the bridge, which might mean ignoring the bike lane before it. That's related to another phenomenon that we noticed in Ottawa, where the bike network relies a lot on multi-use pathways along rivers and canals. They have excellent separation from cars, but they can be narrow and full of pedestrians at times, so you often see sports cyclists in particular riding on the road. This got a lot of people mad. Cyclists aren't using the bike lanes, except that these aren't bike lanes. They're multi-use pathways, and they have a speed limit of 20 kilometers or 12 miles an hour. You might not know that if you don't walk or bike the trail yourself, but for sports cyclists or faster bike commuters, using the pathway is literally against the rules. Sometimes cyclists end up on the road instead of the bike lane due to a simple confusion or misunderstanding. This cyclist here is riding to the left of parked cars instead of using the bike lane on the right. But it's probably because one block back, the bike lane was on the left of parked cars, in order to give cars access to electric chargers on the curb. Then the bike lane switches to the right of parked cars, which is a better position further from traffic, and the cyclists just happened to miss the change. They should have done this, but they did this. A mistake, but understandable. This section of bike lane was open, so this person could have been using it, but it was closed for construction down here, so you can see why they might not have realized. Another day I saw this group of 4 people outside of the bike lane and couldn't see why. Maybe because the lane is new? Then riding further down I realized that it was blocked by a landscaping vehicle. The people didn't have to be out of the bike lane as soon as they were, but they did have to get out at some point. And after the truck, everyone got back into the bike lane. Finally, I also have shots of cyclists leaving the bike lane to go around snowplows, street cleaners, and slower cyclists such as children. But these are, of course, all temporary, and the cyclist goes back into the bike lane afterwards. I don't want this video to give the impression that every time a cyclist doesn't use a bike lane, it's for a good reason or acceptable. I do have a handful of shots where the cyclist is clearly behaving badly. Like this one, where a cyclist is not just outside of the bike lane, but is actually going against traffic on the other side of the road, because they seem to be going to a destination on that side. Yeah, don't do that. I also have a few shots where cyclists are outside of the bike lane and I couldn't figure out the reason, like this one or this one. Maybe there was a reason I missed, I don't know. But ever since we started hearing people say this, I've been fascinated by the claim and really paying attention anytime I saw a hint of it happening. It turns out that you can usually figure out the reason. Construction is probably number one, but there can also be snow or debris or parked cars in the bike lane. Sometimes the bike lane isn't easily accessible from where you're starting, or you need to leave the lane for a certain turn. Things like that are more common when you have a two-way bike lane on one side of the road than when you have unidirectional bike lanes on each side in the same direction as traffic. Sometimes the bike lane is actually a multi-use pathway with a speed limit that faster riders shouldn't use or aren't even allowed to use. Sometimes cyclists don't realize that there's a bike lane if it's new, or if they're in a new city whose bike network they don't know. Sometimes a confusing or inconsistent configuration can leave you outside of a bike lane. But to be very clear, cyclists being outside of a bike lane doesn't actually seem to be that common. The clips we found for this video were a few dozen out of thousands of shots of cycling that we've compiled over the years. We actually made a different video a few years ago, where we counted people on different bike routes in Toronto and Ottawa, and found that yep, most of them use the bike lane. So where does this idea of cyclists rampantly ignoring bike lanes come from? It's possible that people are encountering vehicular cyclists, followers of a philosophy popularized by John Forrester that believes that bike lanes are bad and cyclists need to act like cars. I think these people are much more vocal online than actually present in real life, but it's possible that they're more common, especially as a percentage of riders, in other cities, especially cities that only have narrow painted bike lanes, instead of an actual network of protected or separated bike routes. But I also think there's something else perceptual going on. Drivers are understandably paying attention to the road more than the bike path, so they're much more likely to notice cyclists who are on the road than on the bike path. And then they don't necessarily notice the reasons why cyclists will be out of the bike path, because as drivers, it's just not their job to keep tabs on things like construction detours along bike routes. Even as a pedestrian watching some of these, it wasn't obvious until I actually walked down the route or watched for a few minutes. There's no way of knowing that this bike path is new, and that people might not realize that it's there or that it's open, unless you come through here often or spend a lot of time on Google Street View. In the end, the idea that cyclists in large numbers are just arbitrarily ignoring good infrastructure and riding in the road just because they can, is a common claim but not something I've ever been able to verify. The vast majority of cyclists will use bike infrastructure, especially high-quality bike infrastructure that forms a network and connects people to places that they want to go.